If you have siblings, you'd be well aware of how hard it is to share things. You may still harbor resentment that your time on the Wii playing Super Smash Bros. Was cut short by a sibling. Or maybe family dinners regularly become a nightmare when no one can agree on what to eat. Now imagine sharing the rule of a whole kingdom with your sibling. Charlemagne found himself in that predicament when his father, Pepin the Short, passed away and left the Franks in a tandem role of him and his brother, Carloman. He and Carloman obviously did not get along. To make matters worse, their mother ended up fraternizing with the Lombards and taking the daughter of the king, Desiderata, back to Charlemagne, who was then betrothed to her. That left him with more power and control than Facebook circa 2006. After 3 short years, Carloman ended up dying from natural causes, giving Charlemagne the opportunity to go over his nephew's heads and seize the eastern parts of Frankish control for his own ruling. Now that Charlemagne was the sole king of the Franks, he had a lot to clean up. Frankish leaders had a history of respect earned in war, so Charlemagne quickly began his long and arduous expansion plan. This included spreading religious ideals in the Iberian Peninsula as well as annexing other kingdoms, notably of which was the Lombards. After venturing into Italy and taking the title of King of the Lombards as his own, Charlemagne began integrating them into the Frankish kingdom. He replaced institutions with Italian names with Frankish ones, and eventually, 7 years later, delegated power to his son Pippin. In 799, Pope Leo III was in hot water in Rome and needed help. Good thing he knew a guy. A big, strong, athletic guy, in fact. Charlemagne heeded the bat call and escorted Leo to safety. As a defender and warrior, especially of the Christian faith, Pope Leo realized he was just the person to lead. So, at the height of his power, Charlemagne was crowned the Holy Roman Emperor, and what followed after would cement his name in history. From a young age, Charlemagne knew how to play the game that is life. Similar to how I inherited a Walmart Plus membership from my family, Charlemagne received partial ownership of the Franks. But even though it was handed to him on a silver platter, he earned the trust of those he ruled through various skills he brought to the table. He was charismatic, spoke multiple languages, and his leadership was valued in war, the last of which was especially important for his rule of the Franks. While not quite as influential style-wise as, say, Madonna, Charlemagne did change up the look of a king, as set by his Merovingian predecessors. He wore his hair short, accompanied by a mustache. The sources I read all parroted the idea that he was this vastly handsome man, an active hunter, and his veracity for lovemaking continued even after the death of his 4th wife. He was 6'4", which is tall for our time, but really, really tall back then, too. I think Einhard, one of his trusted advisors, describes him best. A.J. Grant's transcription of Einhard's book relays the idea of that. He was heavily built, sturdy, and of considerable stature, although not exceptionally so, since his height was 7 times the length of his own foot. He had a round head, large and lively eyes, a slightly larger nose than usual, white but still attractive hair, a bright and cheerful expression, a short and fat neck, and he enjoyed good health, except for the fevers that affected him in the last few years of his life. Charlemagne had 18 children, and he was known to forbid his daughters from marrying. I suppose all the kids marrying off would make one hell of a Thanksgiving dinner, but it does make me wonder the reasoning behind it. Was it political, to lessen the possibility of a traitor on the inside? Or was it personal, something tied to his relationship with his own wives? Maybe I'm romanticizing something that was purely strategy, but Charlemagne outlived so many of the women he loved and bore children with that it had to have influenced his view on relationships. Of his 18 kids, some were born in wedlock, 3 of which were boys, meaning that they were said to be heirs in Charlemagne's eventual death. The only son to outlive his father was Louis the Pious, who became co-emperor a few months before Charlemagne's passing. Another one of his kids I'll go into more detail about later is Pippin, Charlemagne's first son born to a concubine. I've been living under a rock for most of my life, so that meant I didn't really know what a concubine was. For all the people out there who are similarly housed in slabs of limestone, a concubine is a woman, typically part of a polygamous relationship, who isn't legally married to a man but still engages with him. That being said, I'll start by discussing the woman he was legally married to. His first wife was Desiderata, daughter of the king of the Lombards. Charlemagne's mother had done her shenanigans and arranged for their marriage, but the love wasn't there, so it didn't take long for Charlemagne to divorce her. Hildegard was his second wife. They had 6 kids who lived past birth together, 3 sons and 3 daughters. Fastrada was his third wife. She wasn't liked by everyone. In fact, a conspiracy had formed as a result of Fastrada's supposed influence on Charlemagne. She was believed by some subjects to be cruel, but they had 2 daughters together. After her death, he married Luitgard, and they lived happily together for 6 years until her untimely death. As for the concubines who are actually named, there are more unnamed. Charlemagne enjoyed his time with Madogard, Gersvinda, Regina, and Adelinde. His tendency to fool around with women did bring wary gaze, especially with his Christian following. Charlemagne's predecessors were Merovingian kings, who were excellent warriors that conquered many kingdoms in the spread of their rule. As this progressed, however, it became harder to unite everyone. Those nowadays with large friend groups will know exceptionally well how difficult it is to get everyone to agree on something. With many diverse backgrounds and ideologies, trying to figure out whether to go to Subway or McDonald's is practically impossible. And what made it harder for the Merovingians, and eventually Charlemagne, is that the kingdom was split between all the male heirs to the throne. So not only were the subjects of the kingdom incredibly fragmented and the success of a leader dependent on expanding the kingdom, there were also multiple kings at any given time. The Carolingian dynasty eventually took control over the kingdom and focused heavily on military strength to maintain control over the fragmented people, which was the state in which Charlemagne and Carloman inherited the rule of. As previously established, Charlemagne's dad, Pippin the Short, usurped the Merovingians' control over the Frankish kingdom. And, much like Dream in his statistically improbable speedrun, he decided to enlist outside help to legitimize his actions. He received support from the Christian church, thus the future of Carolingian rule became inexplicably tied to religion. During Charlemagne's rule, the Pope supported his aggressive offense involving usurping other kingdoms. Taking control of new people also came with the addition of spreading Christianity, sometimes to subjects that were unwilling. At the same time, Charlemagne was seen as religiously open-minded and enforced policies to protect merchants or citizens of the Jewish faith. He became friends with the king of the Persians, who gave him lavish presents, like robes, spices, and even an elephant, the last of which was a spectacle. What do you even do with a live elephant? But by the very nature of expanding into the Iberian Peninsula, Charlemagne's army was seeking to free Christians from Muslim oppression. The continual war against the Saxons was one that lasted for 30 years during Charlemagne's reign. Given that their borders connected, skirmishes would break out, ending in murder, robbery, and arson. That led Charlemagne to declare an official war, though every few years the Saxons would admit defeat and proceed to go back on their word. Charlemagne wanted to convert their pagan religious ideas into Christianity, so at times the Saxons would promise to give up worshipping demons, which ended up being a lie. Charlemagne didn't take a liking to those who lied and violated their oaths, ending with large groups of them being executed. In the end, Saxon territory was conquered and all the citizens were expected to convert to Christianity and partake of the sacrament. After being crowned by Pope Leo as the Holy Roman Emperor, the leaders of Constantinople were wary of Charlemagne's future plans. They believed his next step to be taking more power or seizing their empire. Charlemagne managed to do a little schmoozing, and after sending embassies to the Byzantine court, they managed to patch over the ill feelings without waging war. A Greek proverb was born: "The Frank is a good friend, but a bad neighbor." In a previous section, I briefly mentioned Charlemagne's first son, Pippin, not to be confused with the many other Pippins in this story, or the Lord of the Rings character. He was called Pippin the Hunchback by quite a few of the sources I read, which I think is kind of messed up. Sure, it was a different time, I'll give them that. Maybe it was normal. But I don't want to be remembered as Will with acne or Will with the bad knees. I feel like I have better qualities that people can know me by. Pippin definitely felt the same. He grew up believing that, due to his namesake being taken from his grandfather, and his status as Charlemagne's first son, he'd get to rule the Franks and Lombards one day. But as his kyphosis worsened and his physical stature strayed from the cultural norm, he was outcasted. His dad married Hildegard and had 3 legitimate sons, Charles, Carloman, and Louis, who threw a wrench in Pippin's glamorous future. The first kid in that marriage, Charles, was named after his dad, so it was pretty much a no-brainer that he'd get most of the kingdom. But the second son, Carloman, gave Pippin some relief. "You won't catch me naming my kid after Hop from Pokemon Moon. That guy drove me insane." So Charlemagne naming his kid after his brother was an interesting decision, really setting his second one up for success there. The new kids on the block were getting all the glory and attention, and Pippin was no doubt jealous. It got worse when Charlemagne took a trip to Rome and rechristened Carloman as Pippin. And in that ceremony, it was made clear what kingdoms the 3 sons would rule, excluding old Pippin from any of the fame. It's pretty easy for me to see why that would fester in a person and make them angry. I mean, if my parents wrote in their will that I get custody of the electric Nissan Leaf I ran into a pole, and then they decided they were going to have another kid, name that kid my name, and give the electric car to him, I'd be kind of upset. Old Pippin didn't have the internet back then, therefore he wasn't able to make an Am I the Asshole thread, so he did the middle-age equivalent and joined in on a plot to kill his father and half-brothers. It's normal behavior. The plan went as well as Team Rocket's attempts to catch Ash's Pikachu. That's to say it failed miserably. There were quite a few higher-up officials that took part in it, So Charlemagne did what any level-headed and rational leader would do in the face of opposition. He killed them viciously, but he had a soft spot for old Pippin, so instead of publicly executing him, he just sent him to live the rest of his life out in a monastery. The conquest of the Lombard government irks me a bit in regards to Charlemagne. His mom got him to marry the king's daughter, and to his credit, he divorced her before he took over their entire kingdom and exiled her family. But still, that's gotta be up there in crappy ex-behavior. She died 2 years after Charlemagne became king, so Luitberga, one of her sisters, tried to avenge the banishment of her father. Luitberga was married to the king of Bavaria, so they did some scheming and declared war against Charlemagne. He put an end to that incredibly quick, and Tassilo, the Bavarian king, surrendered. As Charlemagne neared the end of his life, his tenacity for war and conquering other nations seemed to hit a wall. His endlessly expanding kingdom was getting harder to lead, and surrounding kingdoms were just less willing to give in to battle. He'd need more soldiers, but to pay the soldiers, they'd have to be successful in conquests and get riches from said conquests. Some historians claim that his old age and health issues made him soft and created a worse leader. There was one argument made by Bernard Bacharach that argued that Charlemagne's very active sex life was an indicator that he was far from any decline, so that was an interesting read. My interpretation of these events falls more towards the idea that expanding further just became harder. So the conquests weren't as frequent, rewards were dwindling, and it took far too many resources just to maintain the kingdom itself. But even if Charlemagne did lose his touch, he was influential for so long, it was bound for him to grow tired eventually. Charlemagne thought learning and education were incredibly important. Einhard described him as beyond all kings, most eager in making search for wise men, and in giving them such entertainment that they might pursue philosophy in all comfort. These efforts to push education to the mass public helped to preserve over 6,000 classical works, and solidified Carolingian minuscule as a common form of writing. School curriculum was focused on classic Greco-Roman ideas. The 7 subjects were grammar, rhetoric, dialect, astronomy, music, arithmetic, and geometry. He was so passionate about expanding the mind, learning languages, and figuring out how to alphabetize the spoken word. He even wrote and memorized ancient songs that talked about past kings and their wars. Einhard made a specific comment in his detailing of Charlemagne's life that caught my eye. While eating meals, Charlemagne liked listening to a reader recite history or voice the books of St. Augustine. And it made me smile, because in a way, I know a lot of people who do the same. I like turning on TV shows or watching YouTube when I have my meals. It's the way I learn about the past and hear new perspectives. It's kind of nice to feel so connected to this guy from the Middle Ages. Anyway, I think during these recent years in the US, we've lost the value of education. Schools are being defunded, teachers are paid pennies, and the ultimate goal of learning is faded. We don't pursue philosophy in all comfort any longer. But I think since education was so important back then there's no reason why we as a society can't prioritize it again. Art, music, and the likes were tied deeply to Charlemagne's push for education. They were most notably used in church, such as the building created to honor Mary or the restoration of old sacred buildings that had fallen into disrepair. Congregations would sing and read songs. Charlemagne joined in but never sang solo. He took great care that the services were performed with dignity. Charlemagne was a big fan of St. Augustine's work, City of God. They shared the belief that those who seek peace must prepare for war, and that peace is a result of a victory in a just war. Charlemagne was very concerned with loyalty and his personal sense of justice. Most of the stories I've talked about today exemplify this. But there's also a balance to be had. I think it's dangerous to be so steadfast in your own sense of self-righteousness that you start becoming unresponsive to others' views in the world, while at the same time being indecisive and taking no strong actions could potentially hurt the ones you love. I would use Charlemagne's past as a tale of caution. More contemporary leaders, like Hitler, have taken parts of Charlemagne's rule out of context and use it to justify their own skewed ideas. I just think it's important to view history with an open perspective, within the context of those people's lives. Because when we start picking and choosing aspects of the past to support our personal bubble of beliefs, that's when we stray into dangerous territory. As I continued my research on this project, one question kept pestering me over and over. I'd read one thing and go, oh hey, this guy's pretty cool. Then I'd read something else and immediately retract that statement. The question I couldn't find the answer to is, do the ends justify the means? Are historians too forgiving of Charlemagne, calling him the father of Europe? What about the lives he took, the mistakes he made? Does viewing him as this glorious figure take away from the pain he caused? Are his flaws forgivable as a result of him being human, like any of us are, or are they to be looked down on? And if my only children end up being goldfish, will the Rick's name disappear when I do? Or will the work I do and the art I leave behind long outlive me? If a tired art student down the line does a history project on me, will my legacy be one of war or one of peace?